Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as you're coming in. We'll get started in about a minute. Feel free to introduce yourselves as you're coming in from the waiting room. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Michael from Minnesota. Susan from Long Island. Erica from Michigan, Haley from San Diego, Isabella from Florida, Gregory from Houston, Faye from Philadelphia, Jay from Alabama. And there they are coming in too fast. We've got people from all over the country. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. I'm seeing people continuing to pour in from the waiting room. All right, it looks like the flow in from the waiting room is slowing down, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Thank you so much for joining the 7th webinar in our series. Time is flying this year. We're about halfway through the series, and the topic today is transportation to the polls. Please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat as you're coming in from the waiting room. So on today's topic, today's transportation barriers are one of the most common reasons why people do not turn out to vote, and lack of accessible transportation to the polls disproportionately disenfranchises low-income renters. This webinar will share opportunities for you and your organization to partner with nonpartisan voter transportation initiatives and offer inspiration for those seeking to organize their own rides or group walks to the polls. We're going to switch up the order in the agenda a little bit. We will start with Hillary Puda Chikonte, who is the co-president of Turn Up, Turn Out at the University of Michigan, and also our wonderful Our Homes, Our Votes summer intern. She'll speak about her experiences with Turn Up, Turn Out and organizing group walks to the polls. We'll also hear from Sarah Kovich, who's the founder of Rideshare to Vote Aware, to discuss how you can partner with her organization to facilitate rides to the polls. And I'll present briefly about the Our Homes, Our Votes voter pledge card, which is a tool that you can use to help voters overcome transportation barriers and make their plan to vote. Before I hand it over to Hillary to get us started, I'll just share a few housekeeping items. As always, this webinar is being recorded. We'll distribute the recording and the links in the next edition of our Friday email newsletter, The Connection, and we'll have the recording posted on the NLIHC YouTube channel by the end of the week. We also have closed captioning enabled. Thank you so much to our captioner for being here today. I believe our captioner dropped a link also where you can see the captions in a separate window as we're going along if you're interested in following along in that way. We also have the Q&A feature enabled. We ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask your questions rather than the chat. Since we have so many people, we're more likely to catch your question and have time to ask it of our panelists if you use the Q&A box. Speaking of the chat, we ask that everyone engage thoughtfully and respectfully in the chat and live by the platinum rule, which is to treat others the way they want to be treated, even if that's different than the way that you want to be treated. And last but not least, I'll leave you with a reminder that Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is to build the voting power of low-income renters so we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And with that, I will hand it over to Hillary to get us started.
Hi everyone, my name is Hilary Puchconte, and I am, like Courtney said, an intern for NLHG's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Right now, I'm a junior at the University of Michigan studying political science and history. I'm also one of the co-presidents of Turn Up, Turn Out at the university. So we are a nonpartisan student-led organization, and our main goal is to increase engagement amongst all students at I see some Go Blue. Yeah, love that. Yeah. So our main goal is to increase civic engagement among all students at the University of Michigan. So as you see on this slide, you'll see Turn Up, Turn Out's logo. We also see a very interesting graphic from Circle at Tufts University. So Circle is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. And this graphic shows states with the highest youth voter turnout in 2022 in the 2022 midterms. So as you can see, there's Michigan, Maine, Minnesota, Oregon, and Colorado. And the state of Michigan had the highest youth voter turnout in the midterms. And I just want to take some time to say this number would not be achievable if it wasn't for students all across the state doing amazing work to mobilize their peers to vote. I happen to do this work on the University of Michigan's campus, but there's a lot of amazing work also happening at Michigan State University, Central Michigan University, Western Michigan University, universities all across the state of Michigan. But also there's like also national groups that do a lot of really great work in the state of Michigan, like the League of Women Voters. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because this is a really amazing number, but this takes a lot of work to get to this number. It's not just like one group that does this. And I just want to say, overall, I'm really grateful to live in a state, and go to school in a state in which voting rights are being expanded, which makes voting accessible to people overall, but also makes voting more accessible to groups that have historical low turnout rates, like young people. Next slide, please. So yeah, just talking more about my organization at University of Michigan. So TUT is like I said before, a nonpartisan student-led organization that works to increase civic engagement amongst all students at U of M. So we work with both in-state and out-of-state students, but we also work with students that might not be able to vote in the United States. We also still like to do civic engagement presentations for them and stuff like that. So it's TUT is Turn Up, Turn Out is for everyone, those who can vote and can't vote. So we have three main pillars, which are voter registration, voter education, and voter turnout. So with voter registration throughout the school year and even in the summer, we table all over campus, like at university libraries, at the student unions on campus, and at the dining halls on campus, and many more places. And in the summer, we also table at every student orientation in the summer. This is super important because civic engagement work can't just be right before an election, for example. People are always turning 18, people are always getting eligibility to vote, and you really want to make sure that you are a consistent figure in your community. So when people turn 18 or when people, get the right to vote, they always know that there's like a figure in their community that they can go to help them register and find voting information. And that's what we try to offer that to all students. And in terms of voter education, we host regular voter education programming called Dinners for Democracy. So overall, like, young people care about a lot of different issues, but don't always know how voting for like a drain commissioner will affect them. So Dinners for Democracy is a nonpartisan educational presentation that connects key issues that students care about to offices up and down the ballot. So the kind of structure of it all is that we give a presentation and we have a discussion about these policy issues that students care about over dinner. Dinner is kind of a way to get them in, but conversation, presentation is kind of what gets students to stay and come back for different topics. And then we have different outreach events that just help students kind of mobilize themselves, mobilize their peers to vote. That might be we've worked with student organizations in the past to run voter registration drives. We also have a new outreach event called Walk the Polls, which I'll be talking about shortly. But yeah, we also participate in civic holidays like National Voter Registration Day, National Voter Education Week, as well as Vote Early Day. And yeah, so Turn Up, Turn Out is part of a bigger coalition at the University of Michigan called the UMich Votes Coalition. And one of the biggest ways we are able to collaborate with the UMich Votes Coalition is with the Satellite Clerk's Office. So just a little bit more background about this. So in 2020, Ann Arbor City Clerk's Office partnered with different groups at the university, like Creative Campus Voting Project and the University of Michigan's Museum of Art, to create satellite clerk's offices, which are in the heart of campus at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. As a place where students can go to vote if they choose to vote in Ann Arbor. These offices have been such a beautiful collaboration between the university as well as the city of Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor City Clerk. To make like voting more accessible for students and who are new to the voting process. Colleges oftentimes first time young people are voting. So it's really important that everyone, but especially young people, associate voting with positive experiences, like voting with their friends, like, not having long lines, like, a bright office with really friendly staff, etc. So when young people associate voting with positive experiences, it, helps them want to vote in more and more elections and overall become like a consistent lifelong voter, which is honestly the entire goal of all the work that we do, is for young people to want to vote forever and to want to encourage people they know to vote for a long time, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's one of the biggest collaborations Turn Up Turnout does with the UMich Votes Coalition. So we do line management at the satellite clerk's office. We train fellows to work at the satellite clerk's office. So these are students whose like campus job is to work at the clerk's office, whether that be introducing students to the clerk's office, to the space. That also includes like they do voter registration assistance, stuff like that. And we also partner with the coalition, like I said earlier, in creating this kind of welcoming civic engagement atmosphere on campus. So students will forever associate, civic engagement with a positive experience and hopefully want to continue that in their professional and personal lives going forward. And we also give expertise on voting questions students might have. We have a voter hotline. So it's called voter reg questions at umich.edu. So any student or students' parents can kind of email us and we will give them a response within like 24 to 36 hours. So we just try to provide as much assistance as possible for students that, want to decide, do I want to vote in Chicago or do I want to vote in Ann Arbor? Because students have the choice to make. Do they want to vote at their local campus address or do they want to vote, at their home address? Because they can only vote at one, but some people want to vote on campus because, they live there longer than they do at their like home address, or some students want to vote at home because, there's local elections they care about. So it's really the student's decision and we don't really give any advice on that. We just kind of prevent students with the resources they need to make their decision. And then we also do tabling. We do the most tabling out of the coalition, which is like being everywhere people invite us. We kind of have a regular tabling at the libraries, student unions, stuff like that. But we also are invited to table at other campus events, and we also provide that. And yeah, one of our newest events is called Walk to the Polls, which I will talk about more in the coming slides. So yeah, Walk to the Polls is one of the biggest things I've done at Turn Up Turnout. It was only possible to do this kind of work starting with the 2024 Michigan presidential primaries because there's a ballot initiative in the state of Michigan called Michigan Proposal 2 of 2022, which kind of would give early voting to the state. The proposal passed, so we were us at Turn Up Turnout, we're kind of thinking, how can we make it so students are voting early and taking advantage of this opportunity? And the idea that came out of this brainstorming was Walk to the Polls. So this is a flyer of one of the Walk to the Polls that I organized. I am a political science and history double major, so one of the ones I want to organize was one with one of my departments that I'm affiliated with. So I decided to do this with the history department. So kind of as you can see, the information we try to give is that happenstance on the Michigan presidential primary was actually during spring break. And a lot of students kind of either go back home for spring break or they, go abroad for spring break. So oftentimes students aren't really here to vote on election day, which at that time was the 27th. So we kind of use that as a way to be like, vote early, use the opportunity to vote early in this election because you probably won't be here because you're going to be gone for spring break. So yeah, this was an opportunity for students, faculty, and staff to come together and vote at the satellite clerk's office. Kind of the structure of Walk to the Polls is that there'd be a centralized meeting location, which would be at the department's kind of main office. People would come and gather. And then those who wanted to vote in the city of Ann Arbor would walk to the satellite clerk's office together. And those who wanted just voting information or just wanted to be in community with other people in their major could just stay there and chat. But those who wanted to vote in other places, we would give them voting information. Just because primaries differ from state to state. Michigan had theirs in February. I know some states have it in June. May, etc. So students who weren't voting in Michigan but had primaries coming after ours, we would provide them with information about that, and make sure the registration was updated, all of that fun stuff. So it's a really great opportunity for us to kind of utilize early voting in this way and think about, we have these, we have this amazing expansion of election law in the state of Michigan. What can we do to make sure that students are using it? And this is also a way to kind of mitigate the long lines that we saw in the 2022 midterms on campus, but also across the state of Michigan. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of long lines because students were like re-registering at their new address, because oftentimes people forget that, once you move, you have to re-register your new address, but some students had forgotten to do that. So that resulted in long lines at the satellite clerk's office. So I really wanted to ensure that like students were taking advantage of voting early, but also thinking about their voting plan ahead of time. And the walk to the polls was kind of a way we could facilitate this kind of experience. But also it's kind of cool to vote with like, we invited chairs of the department, for example, and just different teachers to kind of vote early with the students. Because that makes a memorable voting experience, right? Like voting with one of your favorite professors or voting with like the head of your department, and kind of like affirming that, for example, for this example of history department, cares about civic engagement and wants students to vote and is willing to kind of do this work to, get students thinking about voting early, or making sure that they're ready to vote in their state whenever the time comes. So yeah, we kind of organize walk to the polls overall by majors or academic groups, but also we encourage like student organizations to organize their walk to the polls. So yeah, that's kind of how we have conceptualized transportation to the polls, and I hope this is helpful for any of the participants in this webinar, thinking about how can you build community with voting, whether that be utilizing early voting and walking in groups or whatever you might conceptualize. But yeah, thank you all for your time and hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Before we move on to the next piece of the presentation, we've actually gotten a few questions from you. I think we can take those right now, if that's all right. And I just wanted to ask if you could speak a bit more about like the brainstorming process that led to this idea. Who were the groups that came together and decided to do Walk to the Polls? What did that kind of process of getting this off the ground look like?
Yeah, it was a lot of like logistical. I think the hardest part was like logistical things to figure out. Like first and foremost, like we were excited that Prop 2 passed. We knew other states had early voting and Michigan had not. So, University of Michigan has a lot of students. We had really long lines in the 2022 midterms, and we really wanted to alleviate that. So we're thinking like, okay, so early voting would help alleviate these long lines, but how do we get students to participate in early voting? And I think there is some literature about, voting with like friends or voting with parents is more likely to increase like voter turnout rates. So we're kind of like using that kind of literature and thinking and conceptualizing, okay, like, students are on campus, students have different, academic groups that they're a part of or organizations that they're a part of. How can we how can we kind of merge the literature that we see, but also create a positive voting experience? And we kind of conceptualize walking to the polls, just because the satellite clerk's offices are in the center of campus. On both Central and North Campus, we're thinking, okay, like this would be accessible for most students. It's like near all their classes, near a lot of academic buildings, etc. But logistically, the hardest part is like how, do you have enough staffing to make sure that anyone's voting questions could be answered? Because we don't, turnout is not just for students that are voting in the state of Michigan, but students from across the country, for example. So that was kind of the brainstorming aspect. We really wanted to ensure that students did not have to wait in long lines anymore, but we also had to think like, how would students take advantage of Michigan's early voting? And we're thinking, voting in community, voting with your friends, voting with your classmates, voting with your teachers that you love so much. That could help create this kind of community building and hopefully associate positive experiences with voting, and hopefully would create like lifelong voters essentially.
Great. And I know on this call we have a lot of people from organizations that are primarily serving or led by low-income renters. And so I think a lot of the lessons from organizing walks to the polls on campus will most likely apply, although some things would be a little bit different. Do you have any pieces of advice for someone on this call that might be looking to get started with their own walks to the polls program?
Yeah, definitely. One, always like contact your local city clerk. The local Ann Arbor city clerk was such a really great partner in this idea. We were able to, ask for like, you know, what is like we were able to ask the city clerk, like, what does early voting look like in the state of Michigan? Like, what is it going to look like in Ann Arbor? Just like ask those preliminary questions so you could like start planning around that. Voting knowledge that they knew, but also think about like coalitions or like where would people in your where would local income renters like, in your area feel comfortable? Like, what are the communities that they are part of? What are the communities that they would want to vote with? Those initial questions, but also thinking about like making this like a community centric idea. Walk to the polls where students helping other students vote. And if you're serving low income renters, maybe like, and if there's tenant leaders that are really involved, maybe like asking them to do this work or like lead the work and having their voice be centralized in this work is super crucial too, because it's creating community among tenant leaders or low income renters overall, which in turn is going to like create this kind of culture of voting within the area, and that's super important. It's not just for walk to the polls. It should not just be for one election, but creating culture of voting for all elections to come in your area.
That's a great point. Something else that I would add is that walks to the polls are, of course, only really possible if there are polling places within walking distance. And there is a lot of research on polling place closures being disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income communities. So there's definitely an advocacy piece here too of advocating to get a polling place accessible to your community, or maybe it's a ballot drop box, some way that makes voting as accessible to your community as possible. And then once that's there, once that infrastructure is there, build a community around it, as Hillary's been talking about. I'll turn to some audience questions now. We got a great question from Susan. Besides youth, one of the groups that face obstacles voting are people with disabilities, and what type of work is happening to help them. Hillary, on your campus, are there partnerships with disability groups in the voting kind of turn out coalition?
Yeah, we try to make sure that all of the satellite clerk offices are ADA accessible or ADA like approved. But something that we are trying to initiate this year is a kind of dial a ride service. So the state of Michigan had a ban on like rideshare services doing work like in the entire state, but that ban has been lifted. So we're working with not only coalitions in like Washtenaw County, where even University of Michigan is housed, but also on campus to kind of conceptualize what it would look like for us to provide like rides to the polls for like those who are impacted from like a disability who can't necessarily like get to the polls themselves. So this is like a new idea that we're kind of like conceptualizing still. So I don't have like much talk. I didn't talk about it today because it's still in the planning phase. We are trying to work with like coalitions within Washtenaw County, but also at the university to kind of make sure voting is accessible to those who have disabilities by using a student-led rideshare service.
Fantastic. I'll also add that there's a really great organization called Rev Up. That's a project of the American Association for People with Disabilities, and they do a lot of really great organizing and advocacy on disability voting rights. So I definitely recommend checking them out for some more information and guidance for voting and accessibility. We also got a great question from Jennifer. What if the group I want to focus on is unhoused people? Can I use the DPSS address office for them? We did a webinar actually 2 weeks ago on voting while experiencing homelessness that gets into some of the nuances of address requirements. But the answer is typically yes in terms of a mailing address. You can typically use an office, but it's recommended to look into your specific state protocol for registering voters without a permanent address. And I can actually drop a link to some resources from our partners at National Coalition for the Homeless and National Alliance to End Homelessness about that. Hillary, I'm not sure if there's anything you wanna add on that question.
No, I think you summed it up perfectly, Courtney.
Great. I will get those links in the chat, as well as the link to our webinar from 2 weeks ago where we dive into voting and experiencing homelessness. Well, thank you so much, Hillary. Please feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A for Hillary. And she is on our Homes Our Votes team as our first ever Our Homes Our Votes intern. We're very lucky to have her and for all the insights that she brings from her campus experiences. All right, we're gonna dive into the next piece, which is talking about a tool that we have through the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign that you can use to facilitate transportation access as well as other forms of support for voters that are looking to make their voting plan or may need some additional resources. And that is our voter pledge cards. So we can go on to the next slide. Actually, no, we're on the right slide, correct. Okay, so this is a voter pledge card. For those of you who aren't familiar with voter pledge cards, they serve two purposes. The first is to remind newly registered voters of the upcoming election. And the second is to collect contact information for newly registered voters so you can follow up and help them make a plan to vote. This is really critical, as Hillary mentioned, because research shows that voters who are asked to talk through their voting plans are much more likely to actually vote. This will also enable you to connect any voters who are still figuring out their voting plan with resources in the community. So you'll see on the slide just a quick snapshot of the voter pledge card. This is what it looks like. Voters fill out the top half with their contact information, and then they can check off a box if they need help finding their polling place, if they need transportation to the polls, or if they need voter ID assistance. And then if they're the staff or volunteers who are running the voter registration drive will keep that top half of the card so they can follow, so you can follow up with them. The bottom half of the card has blank spaces, which you can fill in with your state's mail-in voting and early voting deadlines if applicable. The newly registered voter will keep this bottom half of the card for themselves, which reminds them of their pledge to vote. We can go to the next slide. Here you'll see we have the pledge card translated. It's available in both English and Spanish. It's all the same content translated. And we can drop the link in the chat both to the English version and the Spanish version. And there's also a page where all of these resources live. It's ourhomes-ourvotes.org/voter-registration. So all of the resources we're going to share in the next few minutes live on that page. So we have it available in both English and Spanish. We also created a user guide to using the voter pledge card. We know it's a bit of a multi-step process. There's a lot of different moving pieces with collecting the information, following up with voters, and most importantly, keeping all of this information secure because people are providing contact information. We want to make sure that it is only used by and accessible to the people who are running your voter registration drive. So we can go to the next slide. This is a snapshot of the user guide that we created. It walks you through each step of using this pledge card in a secure and effective way to reach and follow up with newly registered voters. So I'm just going to walk through kind of some of the highlights of this pledge card, of the user guide, so it's familiar and you feel comfortable getting started using the pledge card. The user guide walks through all of these steps, as well as two options for facilitating follow-up with voters who need transportation assistance or voter ID assistance. You can either organize this follow-up as part of your organization's own voter outreach, or you can share contact information back with us at NLIHC so we can organize the follow-up. We can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, and I'll just emphasize again because it is really critical, something that we emphasize throughout the user guide is to be cautious with voters' personally identifiable information when using the pledge card. When you're collecting and storing this information, be sure that it can only be accessed by trusted and trained staff or volunteers who will only use it for the intended purpose of following up to encourage voter turnout. This applies both to storing the physical pledge cards and storing the information digitally after you input it into a spreadsheet. And it goes into this in a little bit more detail in that user guide, so I definitely recommend checking that out. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of the steps, the nitty-gritty of how to use these pledge cards, the first step is to have it on hand at voter registration drives or events with enough copies in both English and Spanish. You should have scissors or a paper trimmer available so that voters can keep that bottom half of the pledge card that reminds them of key deadlines, and you can keep the top half. After your voter registration drive, you should input all responses into an Excel spreadsheet that is securely stored on a password-protected device. Don't share this digital spreadsheet unless it's necessary to do so for outreach purposes. And in any cases where you are digitally sharing it, send it with an encrypted message, and again, only to those trusted colleagues who are trained and are involved in this nonpartisan voter engagement campaign. Once you have all that voter information in an Excel sheet, you can dispose of the paper pledge cards and use a paper shredder to protect voters' information. So the next step after that, we can go to the next slide, is to follow up with voters. Again, you have voters who have registered to vote, they filled out this pledge card, they're excited about voting, and the next step is to really make sure that they have all the information that they need and ask them to talk through their voting plan. So you'll want to call or text all voters who filled out that pledge card to remind them about the election and ask them to talk through their voting plan. Again, going beyond just a reminder and having them go through those active steps of talking through the plan are really critical. It can really boost turnout. We're going to put together a sample script that you can use for this outreach, which we'll have available on future webinars. So we'll share that as soon as we have it. You should follow up with everyone who filled out the pledge card and ask them to articulate their voting plans. And for voters who indicated in the checkbox that they need help finding their polling place, you can send them a link on TurboVote where they'll be directed to state-specific information about finding their polling place. If someone is facing obstacles or not sure where to find their polling place, you can then, when you're on the phone with them or texting them, pull up that link to help them troubleshoot and figure out where their polling place is. I can go to the next slide. Now, as you see on the pledge card, there's those check boxes for assistance with voter ID or transportation assistance. So if you really want to make sure, that you're getting those voters connected with that information because they've checked the box that they need assistance. And there's two options in terms of facilitating that follow-up with the pledge card. The first option is to submit the information of those who have filled out the pledge card to our team at NLIHC, and we can facilitate that follow-up. So if there's a voter who needs rides to the polls, we'll connect them with the team at Rideshare to Vote Aware. And if there's someone who needs voter ID assistance, we'll get them connected with the team at Vote Riders, who you may remember if you attended one of our previous webinars this spring. The user guide has two options. The first option is to submit this information to us and we'll get them connected. There's a Google form that we'll drop in the chat. This Google form can only be accessed by me. It's password protected, and any information that you submit in the form will be sent in an encrypted message to our partners. Please note that even if you submit voters' information for us to connect them with voter ID or transportation assistance, you should still make those follow-up, get out the vote reminder calls to make sure that voters articulate their plans to vote. But we will take the lead on getting them connected with our external partners. The other option is to submit that information directly to Rideshare to Vote Aware and or Vote Riders, depending on the type of assistance they need. And the pledge card has detailed instructions for securely submitting that information to each organization. So let's see, we can go to the next slide. That brings us to the end of that section. We'll get those links in the chat for everything regarding the voter pledge cards and the Google form where you can submit voters' information. And I will now take a few questions. Oh, I think the screen was cut off for some people, but we will send out the slides afterwards. It'll go out in our Friday email newsletter, The Connection. So if you missed any of the slides, then you'll be able to download those later on. We also archive everything on the Our Homes Our Votes website, so you'll be able to download those. And thank you so much, Hillary. Hillary just dropped the links for all of those voter pledge card resources. So you can find the landing page where these are all saved. You can find the pledge card in English, you can find it in Spanish, and you can find the user guide, and then the voter pledge card reporting form. And someone has commented that they don't have the option to save the chat. We'll have all of this posted on the Our Homes Our Votes website on the webinars page. So you'll be able to download all of it. It will be available to you even if you aren't able to capture it from the chat right here, right now. We also had a request from Josephine to distribute this information in time for primaries in September. Absolutely, it is live, it's on the Our Homes Our Votes website. We want you to start using it as soon as possible. And while some of this, is geared towards the November elections, it's all very applicable towards the primaries. And we know that every election counts. It's not just about the presidential, not just about the general. So I appreciate that reminder that to use this all the time, not just to be thinking about November 2024. Thank you. And I see a comment from Joseph. Joseph, I will save your contact information and follow up with you later regarding the research project that you're doing. Great. So our panelist from Rideshare to Vote Aware, unfortunately, had a conflict and can't be here today. Although I can't do justice fully to the information that she's going to provide, I do want to make sure that everyone in this call knows about Rideshare to Vote Aware because it really is a fantastic organization. I'll drop their link to their information in the chat. They provide complimentary rideshare services to voters who need rides to the polls. And I really recommend looking into them because there's very few organizations that do this, and they have a really robust program. They have rides that are accessible to people with disabilities. They have a program that's geared towards LGBTQ voters to provide safe rides, and they're working with us to organize rides for voters in subsidized properties. So again, really encourage you to check out their resources. And I hope that we will be able to welcome Sarah, their founder, on a future call to share more. And I apologize that we don't have that presentation here today. I also will flag regarding Rideshare to Vote Aware that they have a hotline. So any voters that need assistance can call that hotline. So it's really, it's accessible. It's meant to be something that you can distribute. And actually the voter pledge card itself has information about that hotline. So you can kind of use that as a starting point. One question I got from Jillian is, does Rideshare to Vote Aware work in every state? I believe that they're currently active in about a dozen states, but they are very open to expanding. I've spoken with Sarah about this. If they have a partner organization that wants to kind of set up a rideshare hub, will they be providing a large concentration of rides in a certain state? Even if they're not already active there, I think they're very open to getting started. So I'll share Sarah's contact information. And if you're interested in bringing them to your state, if they're not already there, I think that is definitely a possibility. Great, I'll take a minute, see if there are any other questions. Arlene asked if this information is applicable nationally. Yes, regarding the voter pledge card, that's designed to be used in any state. Rideshare to Vote Aware, as I just said, is not active in every state currently, but they have a national network and have the capacity to expand to other states. Great. Let me just grab Sarah's email to share in the chat. That is all right. I just dropped Sarah's email and that'll be included in all the follow-up information. I see a comment from Kate that there are lots of organizations, especially in urban areas, that do nonpartisan ride shares. Absolutely, that's a great point. There may be local organizations, some potentially houses of worship, local League of Women Voters chapters that are doing these rides. So in addition to connecting with groups that have a national presence, I definitely recommend connecting with your local partners, seeing who's doing this, and seeing if you can plug in your constituents with rides that are already happening. I also know that in recent years, Uber and Lyft have done discounts for rides to the polls. I don't have information yet as to whether that's happening this year on election day, but definitely keep an eye out. And if we get any information about that, we'll be sure to share with all of you. Thank you for that point, Kate. Kate also mentioned bookstores and nonprofits. Those are great places to look. I know libraries as well. Great. Dosher is asking if I know which states they operate in. I don't know off the top of my head, but it should be on their website, and I'll drop that link in the chat. I have a question from Jaquel. What about those who do not have an actual address? What can we use to assist them so they can still vote? Great question. And we have a lot of resources from our partners at the National Coalition for the Homeless and the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They each have a campaign that is geared towards registering and mobilizing voters experiencing homelessness. So I'll drop those links to their toolkits. We also did a webinar on this topic 2 weeks ago that really gets into the weeds of best practices for registering and engaging unhoused voters. So I'll drop that link as well. Here's the resources from You Don't Need a Home to Vote for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And then Everyone Votes from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They have really robust toolkits. And no worries, they're on vacation because we record and archive everything. You can find that all online. Got the link coming up for our July 1st webinar. But the short answer to the question is that people experiencing homelessness have the right to vote. And in terms of figuring out the process for getting them registered without a permanent address, it's always best to consult your state or local election office. Often you can use an agency or a shelter as their mailing address, but then they will need to indicate the place where they regularly stay, whether that's a shelter or an outdoor location, for the purpose of like assigning them a precinct, a polling place. But the short answer and the most important takeaway is they have the right to vote, and there are many steps that you can take to support them. All right. And I see Doug commented that Pennsylvania has a section on the voter registration where clients can mark on a rudimentary map where they live. Exactly. So that's kind of the gist of it for a lot of states. Great. I'll wait another 30 seconds or so to see if any questions are coming in. I see Rhonda is raising their hand. Rhonda, do you have a question that you want to share in the chat? While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and just share a few reminders about opportunities to participate with us beyond the scope of the webinar. I know that many of you have joined regularly. Many of you are joining for the first time today, but there's a lot going on with Our Homes, Our Votes, even beyond the webinar series, and I want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to plug in. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So first, I think many of you are already involved in the Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates network. This group is open to all nonpartisan organizations that share the goals of the campaign. So if you're on this call, you're most likely eligible to be an Our Homes, Our Votes affiliate. We have regular office hours for our affiliates. These take place every other Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. The next ones will take place this upcoming Friday. We have an email listserv where we share announcements and opportunities with affiliates, and we'll also have a post-election virtual gathering for affiliates. Affiliates have enhanced access to some Our Homes, Our Votes tools and resources, and are part of this national network of organizations working towards a shared goal. We'll drop a link in the chat to where you can sign up to become an affiliate if you haven't done so already. We can go to the next slide. I want to make sure that everyone knows about TurboVote. I've talked about it a few times on the calls before, but I know there are a lot of new names and faces. So TurboVote is a one-stop shop where voters can register to vote and update their voter registration, check their voter registration status, sign up for election reminders, and find nonpartisan election information for their community. And we'll drop a link in the chat to this platform. This is a great way to promote voter registration in your networks, both online and in person. And of course, if you yourself have updated your information, changed your name, if you've moved, you should take this moment to scan that QR code and make sure that your voter registration is up to date. So if you ever have any questions about using TurboVote or want to integrate it into your outreach, please feel free to reach out to me. It's also available in both English and Spanish, so definitely encourage you to use that as a bilingual resource. We can go to the next slide. The Our Homes, Our Votes website has a comprehensive resource library with tools and templates that you can use to launch your own nonpartisan voter and candidate engagement work. This year, we're constantly updating and adding to the resource library with new tools like the voter pledge card. So if you're looking for more where that came from, I encourage you to check it out. It has all the most essential resources bundled in one place. We'll drop the link to that site as well. You can go to the next slide. I also want to flag National Voter Registration Day. I think we've talked about it a few times on these calls before, but there is an announcement related to National Voter Registration Day. So National Voter Registration Day is a nonpartisan civic holiday that's dedicated to celebrating and uplifting voter registration. Everyone should definitely save the date for National Voter Registration Day. It's on Tuesday, September 17th this year. So mark that down. We encourage all of you to sign up as a community partner. Community partners receive access to exclusive training webinars and free swag from National Voter Registration Day. And National Voter Registration Day also recently announced its event grant opportunities for community partners. These are grants that range between $500 and $1,500 to support in-person events on National Voter Registration Day. So first, you'll want to sign up to become a community partner. And then once you've signed up, you are eligible to apply for this event grant. And Hillary just shared the link to both the partner sign up and the event grant sign up. The grant application is coming up pretty quickly. It's a short window. It's due on July 18th, this Thursday. So definitely take a look and apply if you're planning on doing one of those events on National Voter Registration Day. We can go to the next slide. Before we close out, I'll just remind everyone that this webinar series continues to take place roughly every other week until mid-November. We hope you'll continue to join us and spread the word to your networks. The next one will take place on Monday, July 29th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern and is titled Housing Providers and Voter Engagement. The webinar will share creative strategies that subsidized housing providers can employ in partnership with their residents to promote civic engagement and get out the vote in their communities. You can check out a full description of next week's webinar and descriptions for the entire series on the Our Homes, Our Votes website. We can go to the next slide. You'll see a little snapshot of all of the webinars coming up. So there's still a lot of great content to come for the remainder of the year. That brings me to the end of the webinar. I'm going to scroll through the chat and see if there's any remaining questions. And again, thank you all for being here and for being a fantastic audience and asking so many great questions. I see a question from Rhonda. I work with an organization founded, led, and ran by our BIPOC community, all who have current or former lived experience of homelessness. Are there resources to support a lived experience coalition who may not have funding to organize for this in their communities? Thank you so much, Rhonda. Yes, I definitely first encourage you to become an affiliate. We would love to have your group as part of the affiliates network and can provide our online resources, some customized trainings, kind of a network of peers. So we really appreciate you asking that question, and also encourage you to apply for that grant from National Voter Registration Day. We'll also continue to flag other grants that we come across that provide similar resources. Lisa asked if it's possible to get a recording of this webinar. Absolutely. We will have the recording posted on our YouTube channel, and we'll send it out in the next edition of The Connection, which is our Friday email newsletter. It will also be archived on the Our Homes, Our Votes webinars page, which Hillary just dropped in the chat a few minutes ago. I see Danette dropped the links, dropped the list of the states where Rideshare to Vote Aware currently operates. Thank you so much for that, Danette. I appreciate that. And I see Hillary is going to recap some of those important links. Thank you so much, Hillary. Star said, I have some ideas of who to ask for rideshare, that they are rural and lack of transportation is a barrier. Absolutely. I know that in rural communities, the transportation barriers can be even more severe. And as you're all figuring out what types of organizations are providing this support, I encourage you to report back to us, so that we can share that intel with our broader network, so people know where to look. Susie requested the link for TurboVote. Yeah, Hillary, if you wouldn't mind just dropping that one in the chat one more time, that would be great. Thank you. All right, I'll wait another minute or so for any additional questions. All right, I think that covers everything. Well, thank you so much to Hillary for your fantastic guest presentation. Thank you to everyone for all of your thoughtful comments and peer suggestions, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Have a great rest of the week.